20 years is long enough for a child to become a stranger, and for a mother to become a rumor. I've learned this the slow way, the humiliating way, the way time drills truth into you until you stop flinching. My apartment is small. One bedroom, one living room that tries very hard to be two things at once, and a kitchen just big enough for me to pretend I'm still cooking for a family that isn't here. The building is quiet in the mornings, the kind of quiet that makes you hear your own breathing and wonder when exactly your life got reduced to that sound. I keep my routines because routines are polite. They don't argue with you. I wake up at 6. I rinse the same chipped mug I've owned since Sienna was in middle school. It has faded flowers on it and a hairline crack near the handle. I should throw it out. I never do. It feels like proof that something in my life lasted longer than a promise. Coffee first, then pills, then the slow, careful walk across the living room, past the framed photos that line the shelf like a small, stubborn museum. There's Sienna at 8, missing her 2 front teeth, laughing like the world is uncomplicated. There, Grant at 5, standing next to a lopsided snowman, proud of a creation that partly collapsed but still held its shape. There's Thomas, my husband, in a brown coat I can still picture on his shoulders. He died 23 years ago, but grief doesn't obey calendars. It just changes outfits. Sometimes I talk to those frames while I'm dusting. Not conversations, exactly. More like short updates. I'm still here. I still remember. I didn't turn into the villain you needed. I used to hear my mother's voice in my head when my children were young. She'd say, "Make your home a place they want to come back to." I did that, I really did. But I learned that homes don't compete well against pride, money, and the kind of silence that becomes a lifestyle. The pension check comes in monthly, dependable like a boring friend. The number is never dramatic. It's enough for bills, groceries, and the quiet math of survival. It's also enough for the small ritual I've been performing for 2 decades. The gifts. I don't know when exactly it became a rule in my head, but it did. Every birthday, every holiday, every significant date I could justify. A shawl, a silver set, a bicycle for a grandson I never met, chosen after I stared at online listings like a fool trying to read the future. I once spent 2 weeks debating a $250 shawl because the fabric looked soft and expensive enough to say I tried. Another time, I bought a $600 silver set because I imagined Sienna opening it and hearing something in her chest crack open too. I even mailed a $500 bicycle after I found a photo of Luca's online, smiling beside a friend's bike at what looked like a neighborhood picnic. My pension would arrive, and I'd split it in my head into categories. Food, rent, medicine, hope. Hope was never the biggest category. I wasn't reckless. I wasn't delusional. I was a mother doing the kind of arithmetic that doesn't show up in financial literacy classes. What it cost me wasn't just money, it was dignity. Because each package went unanswered. No text. No thank you. No polite lie. The silence was so complete, it almost felt organized. For a long time, I told myself they were busy. Then I told myself they were hurt. Then I told myself they'd circle back when life calmed down. At some point, later became a place people go to avoid responsibility. And I was left holding the leftovers of my own optimism. On good days, I can keep the ache in a manageable corner of my body. I can fold it up like a blanket and pretend it's not heavy. On bad days, the ache spreads. It sits on my chest when I'm trying to sleep. It rises in my throat when I pass families laughing in grocery aisles. It follows me outside. I still go to the park 2 or 3 times a week, not because I'm athletic, because the fresh air gives me something to do with my grief. The benches there are mostly occupied by people my age, grandparents, people who complain about their knees and then light up the moment a small child runs toward them with sticky hands and loud joy. I've watched women with silver hair lift toddlers into their laps and call them my heart. I've seen men teach kids how to feed birds, their voices soft in a way men don't always allow themselves. I love that for them. I also hate it for me. I never knew you could hold happiness for someone else and envy in your own palm at the same time. One afternoon, I watched a little girl in a yellow hoodie chase bubbles while her grandmother laughed so hard she had to grip the bench. I looked away quickly, like grief was something contagious. And then I went home and cried for an hour because I couldn't remember the last time anyone ran toward me. The cruelest thing about modern life is that it offers you tiny windows into the happiness you aren't invited to. Facebook did that to me. I wasn't stalking, I was surviving. It started with a mutual friend posting a group photo at a charity event. Sienna was in it, flawless in a way that felt almost theatrical. I recognized her smile immediately. That same smile she used to give teachers when she wanted to be praised and excused at the same time. I clicked the profile, I hesitated, then I scrolled. There they were, the grandchildren. Not all of them, not a family portrait that said here we are, whole and proud. Just crumbs. A birthday cake behind a blur of faces. A Christmas photo where Lucas was visible in the corner, taller than I expected. A Halloween post with Nora dressed as something magical and expensive. I saved screenshots like a desperate archivist. Then I felt ashamed and deleted them. Then I saved them again. One night I searched Grant's name and found a tagged photo from a work event. He looked older, sharper, like someone who decided sentimentality was a waste of energy. There was a mention of his daughter, Eliza, in the comments. Her name. Just her name. 3 syllables that landed in my life like a quiet explosion. I whispered it out loud in my empty kitchen. Eliza. I said it again, as if saying it could summon her into my world. As if names alone could repair history. The day the invitation came, it was raining lightly. The kind of rain that doesn't feel dramatic enough to be symbolic, which is exactly why life uses it. I opened my mailbox expecting the usual. A utility bill. A pharmacy flyer. Something dull and necessary. Instead, I saw a thick ivory envelope with embossed lettering. My name typed in a graceful font. Evelyn Hartwell. Not Mom. Not Evie. Not anything warm. Just the legal version of me. The paper felt expensive. The kind of stationery you don't buy unless you're making sure someone understands you can afford it. My hands went cold. I stood there in the hallway longer than I should have. Like the envelope might change its mind and disappear if I waited. Inside was a formal invitation to Sienna's 45th birthday. A garden party. A date. A time. An address that looked like a different universe. No personal note. No handwritten line at the bottom. No apology tucked between the polite phrasing. The tone was elegant, distant, and so carefully neutral it almost sounded like a corporate event. I read it twice. Then a third time. I searched for subtext, the way people search for storms on the horizon. You are invited, it said. Not we missed you. Not I was wrong. Not let's try. Just a polished sentence that could mean anything. Or nothing. My first instinct was hope. That stupid, loyal animal. My second instinct was fear. Because hope after 20 years doesn't walk into your life softly. It kicks the door in and starts rearranging furniture. I sat at my kitchen table with the invitation flat against the wood. The apartment felt smaller in the light of it. I looked at the frames again. Sienna with missing teeth. Grant beside his snowman. Thomas in that brown coat. A whole family preserved in glass, while the real version of them lived somewhere far away, thriving without the inconvenience of remembering me. I tried to imagine Sienna writing my name on that envelope herself. I couldn't. I tried to imagine Grant saying, maybe we should invite her. I laughed once quietly because it sounded absurd. This invitation didn't feel like a bridge. It felt like a stage. And I'd been handed a role without being told the script. Still, I folded the card carefully and placed it beside my mug. I told myself I was calm. I told myself I was rational. I told myself that at 69, I wasn't still the kind of woman who could be emotionally ambushed by a piece of fancy paper. But my heart wouldn't settle. Because deep down, beneath the grief and the long discipline of survival, I recognized something else. This wasn't love returning. This was something else finding me. And whatever it was, it had waited until I was old enough to think I might accept anything just to stop being alone. I stared at the invitation until the afternoon light thinned. Hope was back in the room. I didn't trust it for a second. By Wednesday, the invitation had stopped feeling like paper and started feeling like a countdown. I didn't tell anyone. There wasn't anyone to tell, not really. My neighbors knew me as the quiet woman who watered the hallway plants and carried groceries like they weighed more than they should. The cashier at my corner store knew my face and my loyalty to the cheapest decent coffee, and that was the sum of my small world. But this was not a small world event. This was Sienna. A mansion. A garden party. An entire lifestyle I had only seen through curated photos and accidental Facebook glimpses. So I prepared the way people prepare for war, quietly, methodically, with a dignity that is half pride and half survival instinct. Thursday morning, I took out my pension notebook and sat at the kitchen table like I was about to negotiate with fate. The math wasn't complicated, it was cruel. I could afford this Saturday if I was careful for the next 2 months. I could buy a dress that didn't betray my budget and a gift that didn't betray my role. That mattered more than I wanted to admit. Because if I showed up looking poor, I would become the story they told about me. If I looked needy, I would confirm every excuse they've used for 20 years. If I arrived wearing the wrong shoes or the wrong smile, the room would quietly agree that my absence had been justified. People in circles like theirs don't even have to be cruel out loud. They are fluent in silent verdicts. So I told myself I wasn't doing this for them. I was doing this for me. A lie maybe, but a useful one. I went to a department store downtown. The kind with polished floors and employees who speak softly into headsets like everyone is important and time is expensive. I walked slowly, not because my knees needed it, but because I refused to look intimidated. I tried on 3 dresses. The first was navy, safe, disappear in a crowd safe. The second was black, too funeral, too truth. The third was wine-colored. Deep, rich, almost stubborn. It looked like the color of someone who had survived a long winter and learned how to stand upright anyway. When I stepped out of the fitting room, I barely recognized myself. The mirror didn't show a woman begging for a place in her child's life. It showed a woman who might have been invited on purpose. I checked the price tag and felt the sharp little sting of reality. This was not a casual purchase. This was a decision with consequences. I bought it anyway. The saleswoman smiled in that gracious, professional way that said nothing about whether she thought it was wise. I appreciated her silence. The gift was harder. A card felt cheap. Cash felt desperate. Something sentimental felt risky, because sentiment only works when both people agree to remember the past. So I chose a sterling silver set. Elegant, neutral, expensive enough to make the message clear. I am not here to borrow your life. I still have one of my own. Carrying those bags home felt ridiculous and sacred at the same time. I laid everything on my bed like offerings. The dress on one side. The silver box on the other. Between them, I placed the pearl necklace my mother gave me when I was young. She wore it on her wedding day. She wore it when she walked into hospitals with fear in her eyes and faith in her spine. She wore it to every event that mattered, not because pearls change the world, but because they remind you who you are when life tries to make you forget. I hadn't worn it in years. Not because I stopped loving it, because I stopped feeling like I belonged anywhere that required it. That night, I opened the small velvet case and ran my fingers over the cool, smooth beads. Generational symbolism is a grand way to describe what it really is. A mother's quiet insistence that you deserve dignity no matter what your children do to you. I decided I would wear it. Not as armor. As lineage. Friday was rehearsal day. I hate that word. It makes love sound like a performance. But after 20 years of silence, a simple greeting feels like stepping onto thin ice. I stood in front of my bathroom mirror and tested sentences like they were fragile glass. Happy birthday, Sienna. Too formal. Too stiff. It's so good to see you. A lie, but a polite one. You look beautiful. True, probably. Safe. I even practiced smiling at the right speed. Not too eager. Not too cautious. Not the smile of someone who has been starving for affection. I couldn't believe I was doing this at 69. But pride is a funny thing. It survives humiliation. It even adapts to it. I packed my small purse with ridiculous care. Tissues. Breath mints. A simple lipstick. The invitation card itself, as if I might need proof that I wasn't trespassing. Saturday arrived too bright. The morning light looked cheerful in a way that felt almost insulting to my nerves. I showered longer than usual. I pinned my hair carefully. I put on the wine-colored dress and watched the fabric settle into place like it had been waiting for this moment longer than I had. The pearls went around my neck last. The clasp clicked shut. And something in me did too. I wasn't naive. I didn't think a dress and pearls could repair a fracture that lasted 2 decades. But they could help me walk into that house with my head up. And today, that was enough. The taxi ride felt like crossing invisible borders. The city changed in small, telling ways. Cleaner streets. Larger trees. Houses that didn't just provide shelter, but announced status. When we reached the entrance, I understood immediately why the invitation had felt like a different universe. The mansion wasn't just big. It was curated. The driveway stretched out with quiet confidence. The landscaping looked professionally composed, like nature had been hired and instructed to behave. I paid the driver and stood still for a moment. My apartment was a life built on endurance. This place looked like a life built on display. I rang the bell. A staff member opened the door. Not Sienna. Not Grant. Not family. A polite stranger in a crisp uniform who greeted me like I was a scheduled appointment. My name was checked against a list. I smiled anyway. Inside, the air smelled faintly of citrus and something expensive I couldn't name. The floors were so clean they reflected the light without effort. My shoes made soft, respectful sounds on marble. I suddenly became aware of everything. My posture. My bag. The sheer modesty of my existence. The staff member gestured for me to walk through the hallway. The modern art hallway. White walls. Large abstract pieces. Sculptures that looked both priceless and aggressively confusing. A massive canvas with violent red strokes. A minimalist black form that might have been a chair or a metaphor. A glass installation that caught light in sharp angles, beautiful and cold. It felt like a psychological gauntlet designed to make visitors question whether they deserved to be there. I kept walking. Slowly. Calmly. As if I belonged among these expensive riddles. Because the truth was, I had survived something more complex than modern art. I had survived parenthood. Then erasure. Then the long, quiet aftermath. At the end of the hallway, I heard laughter. Music. The hum of a crowd that didn't worry about what anything cost. The garden doors were open. Beyond them, a world of linen, champagne, soft voices, and effortless wealth waited like a stage already lit. I paused at the threshold. For a brief, sharp second, I felt like a ghost with good taste. A woman who existed in history, but not in anyone's current life. The pearls rested against my collarbone. The wine-colored dress held its shape. The gift in my hands felt heavy with meaning I wasn't sure anyone would accept. I inhaled once. Then I stepped into the garden party. Not as a beggar. Not as a forgiven mother. But as someone who had been invited and would not apologize for taking up space. And yet, even as I walked forward with practiced composure, the cold truth curled quietly in my stomach. I wasn't sure I was here because I was wanted. I was afraid I was here because I was needed. The garden party was beautiful in the way expensive things often are, controlled, polished, designed to look effortless. I had barely taken 5 steps onto the lawn before I felt the shift. Not hostility, exactly. Something softer, worse. A social temperature drop. People glanced at me the way you glance at a painting you don't understand but don't want to insult. Their smiles were quick, courteous, and empty. The kind of politeness that doesn't invite a second sentence. A server passed with a tray of champagne flutes. I took one because my hands needed something to do. The glass was cold. The bubbles rose like tiny celebrations I hadn't been included in. I told myself to breathe. I was here. I was dressed appropriately. I was invited. But I could feel it already. In this world, an invitation does not always mean belonging. Sienna appeared in a ripple of soft laughter and perfume. People subtly recalibrated around her, the way a room adjusts when someone important enters. She looked stunning. That was the simple truth. A fitted dress, perfect hair, makeup that suggested she'd never known exhaustion or grief, or the kind of stress that turns your stomach to stone. She moved with the confidence of someone who has been rehearsed in admiration. When she reached me, her face brightened into something that passed for warmth. "Evie," she said, loud enough for the people nearest us to hear. "Not Mom. Evie." She touched my shoulder lightly, as if we were old colleagues reunited at a tasteful event. The hug was brief, measured, designed more for witnesses than for me. "I'm so glad you could make it." The sentence was perfect. So was the distance inside it. "Happy birthday," I said, using the version I'd practiced. "You look wonderful." She smiled, the way she used to smile for school photos. "Thank you, that's so sweet." Then she turned her head just slightly, already pulled back into the current of her guests, her social orbit, her curated life. A woman beside her laughed too loudly at something I hadn't heard. A man complimented the flowers. Someone else asked about a trip abroad. Sienna was a conductor now. And I was not one of the instruments she needed. I should have been prepared for this. But hope does that thing where it makes you think you are the exception to your own history. I held my gift tighter, waiting for the right moment to hand it over. The silver box felt formal, almost defensive. She accepted it with professional gratitude. "Oh, thank you. You didn't have to." The words were correct. The tone was final. She handed it to a staff member without even opening it. I watched the box disappear like a small part of my pride, being quietly escorted off the stage. Around us, conversations resumed without me. I stood there for a minute too long, smiling at nothing. Then I did what I've always done when love becomes awkward. I made myself smaller. I found a chair at the edge of the gathering, a tasteful little corner where I could see everything without being in the way of anything. The chair was comfortable, the position was not. It gave me a clear view of the social choreography. The wealthy guests moved in clusters. They spoke the language of vacations, renovations, schools with wait lists, and charity galas that came with professional photographers. They were not cruel. They didn't need to be. They simply treated me like an artifact that had wandered out of the wrong decade. A woman in pale green glanced at my pearls, then at my face, and smiled with a kindness that felt like pity disguised as manners. A man asked me politely how I knew the birthday girl. I said, "I'm her mother." His eyebrows lifted for half a second. Then his smile tightened. "Oh, how lovely." He walked away before I could say anything else. The words, "how lovely," hung in the air like an insult wearing gloves. I took a sip of champagne. It was excellent. Crisp, expensive, cold enough to distract the tongue. It also tasted like nothing that mattered. A drink designed to mark celebration, now sitting in my hand like a symbol of how easily celebration can be performed without sincerity. I watched Sienna move through her guests again, laughter rising around her. And just like that, my mind dragged me backward. 18 years ago. Her wedding day. I remember the morning vividly. She was radiant, nervous in that sweet way brides are allowed to be. I'd helped with her veil. I'd cried quietly while pinning it. She rolled her eyes affectionately and said, "Mom, it's just makeup, don't ruin it." We laughed. The photos from that day still live in my living room, framed like evidence. That wedding was the last time I felt certain I belonged in her life. Afterward, the calls grew shorter, then less frequent. Then casual excuses started arriving like polite debts. Busy with work. Busy with a new home. Busy with travel. Then it became weeks. Then months. Then silence. I remember the first time I called and heard nothing back for 3 weeks. I told myself not to be dramatic. I told myself adult children drift. They return. I told myself I was not entitled to constant access. Those words are easy to say when you don't know you're being phased out deliberately. 15 years ago, I learned the truth with Grant. Not through a fight. Not a clear break. Just a quiet, startling absence from history. I found out about his wedding through a distant cousin who called me, breathless with surprise. "Evie, I assumed you were there," she said. "The photos are beautiful." My throat went dry. "What photos?" There was a pause. The kind that changes your life. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with my phone in my hand, waiting for a call that never came. When I finally confronted him gently, he sounded annoyed, not guilty. "It was small," he said. Small. As if the size of a wedding determined whether a mother mattered. As if I was a logistical inconvenience rather than a person who had raised him. After that, I began to understand the shape of this silence. It wasn't accidental. It wasn't timing. It was decision. I was being erased slowly enough that no one could accuse them of cruelty. And suddenly, the last 20 years made perfect sense in the worst way. The unanswered gifts. The birthdays without return calls. The way my name stopped appearing in family stories. I wasn't part of their narrative anymore. I was a past they had edited out. A laugh rose near me, pulling me back to the garden. A group of guests were toasting Sienna's incredible generosity, her grace, her beautiful home. I watched her accept the compliments graciously. This was her world now. A world that rewarded polish, not loyalty. Performance, not reconciliation. Grant arrived near the center of the party, with Rowan at his side. He looked exactly like the man I'd seen in the rare photos online. Composed, sharp, a little untouchable. For a small, tender second, my chest tightened with the reflex of motherhood. "There you are." Then he saw me. Or rather, he acknowledged my existence the way you acknowledge a passing car. A glance. A nod so small it could be denied later. No approach. No conversation. No awkward but human attempt. Just a smooth avoidance that told me everything I needed to know. Rowan didn't look at me at all. I should have felt rage. Instead, I felt something colder. Acceptance. Because this was not new behavior. This was the polished final form of a choice they made long ago. I took another sip of champagne. It had warmed slightly in the sun. Not enough to become pleasant. Just enough to become bitter. I wondered how many women at this party would still be treated like cherished mothers when they stopped being useful. I wondered if any of them understood how fragile love can become when money enters the room. Sienna drifted closer again later, making a tidy, public loop. She asked me if I was comfortable, if I needed anything. Her voice was gentle. Her eyes were not. A stranger's courtesy, dressed up in a daughter's tone. "I'm fine," I said. She smiled, relieved. Not because I was okay, but because I was being easy. When she moved away again, I finally let myself name what my body had been sensing since I walked through that modern art hallway. This invitation was not a miracle. It was not a second chance given out of remorse. It was not the emotional homecoming I'd imagined in my weaker moments. This was a setup, a polished room, a carefully selected audience, a family performance that needed me in a specific position. I didn't know the script yet, but I could feel the stage lights warming, and something inside me went still. Because when children who have erased you suddenly summon you back into their world, it is rarely for love. It is for something they want, something they expect you to give. I looked across the garden at Sienna and Grant standing near each other, smiling for photos. Two adult children who had mastered the art of looking like good people. My stomach tightened. I lifted my glass one last time. Not in celebration. In quiet preparation. Whatever was coming next, I needed to see it clearly. And for the first time in 20 years, I stopped hoping they would save me. I started preparing to save myself. I didn't realize a garden party could turn into an ambush so quickly. The shift happened the way storms do when the sky pretends it's still friendly. Music softened. Guests subtly migrated toward the lawn's center. Servers appeared with fresh champagne. Like this was the beginning of something worthy of a toast. Sienna was suddenly everywhere at once, smiling, guiding, placing hands lightly on elbows, the conductor again. And Damien Vale, her husband, the man who owned the mansion the way some people own air. He stepped forward with a microphone and that effortless confidence of someone who has never had to apologize for occupying space. He thanked everyone for coming. He praised Sienna's warmth, her generosity, her vision for family. The word family landed strangely in my chest. Then he pivoted. "As many of you know," he said, "Sienna has always believed that true wealth is legacy." People nodded. They love agreeing with a rich man when he uses words that sound moral. He spoke about tradition, about roots, about creating something that would outlive any one person. Then he revealed the plan. A beach house. Not a vacation property. Not a luxury purchase. A family legacy home. The phrase was polished, almost cinematic. He painted it with language designed to disarm. A place for holidays, for reunions, for grandchildren to grow up knowing they belonged to something permanent and beautiful. I watched faces glow with approval. This crowd knew performance when it was profitable, and this performance was excellent. Sienna stepped beside him, radiant as the idea he was selling. Grant and Rowan stood just behind them, the family photo configuration, deliberate and clean. I was still seated at the edge, still outside the main picture. And yet I could feel their eyes drifting toward my direction, like I was a prop waiting for my cue. Damien's voice warmed. "And for this legacy to be truly meaningful," he said, "it needs every generation represented." He turned slightly toward Sienna. She smiled the way a woman smiles when she already knows the ending. Then she searched for me. I felt my body go still. "Evie," she called, both sweet and ceremonial, "would you come up here for a moment?" It wasn't a request. It was a public summons. A few people turned to look at me with interest. A few smiled kindly, like they were about to witness something healing and sentimental. Someone nearby even whispered, "Oh, this is lovely." I stood because refusing a stage invitation in front of strangers is a different kind of humiliation. I walked across the lawn with my spine straight and my heart suspicious. I could feel my pearls cool against my skin like a reminder to stay composed. Sienna took my hand. The gesture was gentle enough to fool an audience. Damien stepped aside slightly to give me space at the center. Grant watched me with a calm expression that didn't reach his eyes. The microphone was angled toward Sienna now. She spoke about the beach house with a softness that sounded practiced. "This is something we want to do for the kids," she said. "For Lucas, Nora, Eliza, a place they can always come home to, a place that reminds them who they are." I noticed she didn't say my grandchildren. She said the kids. Like I was a distant relative who should just be grateful to be included in the sentence. Then she turned fully toward me. "And Mom," she said brightly, "we would be honored if you helped make this possible." There it was. The invisible trap snapping into view. I blinked once. "What do you mean?" Damien smiled smoothly. "We're close to finalizing the purchase," he said, "but we want this to be something the whole family builds together." That sentence was engineered to sound noble. Grant stepped forward with a folder in his hand. A thick one. Not a spontaneous idea. Not a heartfelt moment. Paperwork. Prepared. Printed. Waiting. A staff member appeared with a sleek pen and a small table, as if this were the most natural part of any birthday celebration. Sienna kept her hand on my arm. The perfect touch of theatrical intimacy. "We know you've always wanted to be part of something lasting," she said. I didn't respond because I was busy watching the folder hover closer to me. Then Grant spoke. His voice was low, intentional, almost casual. "We're asking you to contribute $200,000. The number hit the air like a clean slap. 200,000. Not a gift. Not a donation. A financial extraction disguised as family unity. My mouth went dry. I looked from Sienna to Damien to Grant. They were all calm, because they had already rehearsed my confusion. Damien added gently, "It's an investment in family, not just property." Sienna nodded, eyes shining. "This would mean so much," she said. The guests were watching now, fully engaged, smiles ready for the emotional climax. I could feel the pressure building in the air. The expectation that I would cry, say yes, hug my daughter, and become the symbolic matriarch of this glamorous legacy. And then Grant delivered the real blade. He leaned closer, just enough that the audience wouldn't catch the cruelty inside the whisper. "We know you can afford it." I turned my head slightly. His expression was polite. His eyes were cold. "You have about $395 after the apartment sale and consolidation," he said softly. "200 won't ruin you." For a second, I didn't breathe. Because that sentence wasn't about money. It was about surveillance. He knew my numbers. My pension. My accounts. My remaining cushion of safety. Which meant this wasn't a party. It was a targeted operation. I understood everything in a single, brutal click. The invitation. The politeness. The sudden family stage. This wasn't reconciliation. This was a cash strategy designed to exploit the oldest lie in motherhood. That love can be purchased if you spend enough. Sienna saw my hesitation and tightened the performance. Her voice turned warmer, louder. So the guests could hear. "So we can do this quickly," she said, smiling. "The sellers want confirmation this week. It's a fantastic deal and it's moving fast." Urgency. Classic pressure tactic. Damien added, "We'd like to honor you, Evie. We planned a plaque in the entryway, in recognition of Evelyn Hartwell's contribution to the Vale family legacy." A plaque. As if a piece of engraved metal could replace 20 years of abandonment. As if my dignity had a price tag and a display case. I looked at the folder again. The documents were already open to a signature page. A neat line waiting for my name. The pen placed perfectly beside it. This was how they intended to win. Public warmth. Private control. A countdown clock. An audience. I felt the room holding its breath. I felt the old version of myself trying to rise. The mother who used to apologize first. The woman who would have traded safety for the illusion of closeness. But I wasn't that woman anymore. Not after 2 decades of silence. Not after all the gifts returned into nothing. I lifted my chin slightly. "I'm not doing this," I said. The words were calm. Not dramatic. Not tearful. Just final. The air changed. Sienna's smile wobbled. "Mom, please," she said softly, still in performance mode. "This is for the family." "The family," I repeated. I let the phrase sit there long enough to expose its hollowness. "You mean your family," I said. "The one that didn't need me for 20 years. A few guests shifted uncomfortably. Damien's expression tightened for an instant before he corrected it back into smooth, capital-friendly charm. Grant stepped closer. Lower voice. Sharper edge. "Don't do this here." There it was again. The real script. Not love. Control. I took a small step back. "I'm not signing anything," I said, still steady. "And I'm not handing over my future because you want a beach house that looks good in photos." Sienna's voice softened into a warning disguised as emotion. "You're embarrassing yourself." I almost laughed. Because that sentence told me everything. Not "we're sorry." Not "we miss you." Just manage your optics. Grant's hand closed around my arm. Harder than necessary. A brief, unmistakable grip. Not enough to cause a scene. Just enough to remind me that my body in this moment was another thing they felt entitled to steer. I looked down at his hand, then back up at his face. "Let go." He hesitated, then released me with a tight smile that could pass for concern if you didn't speak fluent cruelty. I stepped away from the table, away from the folder, away from the staged redemption they wanted to sell the guests. "I'm leaving," I said. Damien tried one last pivot. "Evie, we can discuss this privately." Privately, where there would be no witnesses and plenty of leverage. "No," I said. "I think this is exactly what you wanted, public." I turned and walked off the lawn. Behind me, I heard the soft, confused murmur of guests, processing the fact that they had not just witnessed a heartwarming family moment. They had witnessed a refusal. A mother choosing herself. A staff member hurried to open the doors. The modern art hallway blurred past me like a tunnel out of a dream I no longer wanted. By the time I reached the driveway, my hands were shaking. Not from regret. From the delayed shock of betrayal, finally being named out loud. The taxi arrived faster than I expected, like the universe offering an exit before I lost my nerve. I slid into the back seat. The driver asked for the address. I gave mine. And as we pulled away, I looked back once. The mansion stood there perfect and untouchable. A monument to wealth. And to the kind of moral emptiness that can be disguised with flowers and champagne. I pressed my forehead lightly against the cool glass of the window. My mind was frighteningly clear. They didn't invite me back to love me. They invited me back to use me. And now that I had refused, I understood the next truth with the calm certainty of someone who has finally stopped lying to herself. They wouldn't just try again. They would escalate. Because people who feel entitled to your money rarely accept a boundary the first time. I closed my eyes. I could already see the path ahead. Not reconciliation. Not negotiation. A clean disappearance. Legal. Financial. Total. If I wanted peace, I would have to become unreachable. Not because I hated my children, but because they had turned motherhood into a trap. And I was done volunteering for the role of prey. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was shattered by emotion, Not in the way people expect a mother to be after a public rupture. I was past the stage of tears that begged for mercy. I was awake because something colder and more useful had arrived. Clarity. When you survive a humiliation that cleanly reveals the truth, your brain doesn't drift into grief. It gets practical. At 2:14 a.m., I opened a notebook I'd been using for pension tracking and grocery lists. I ripped out the old pages like they belonged to someone who still believed in polite endings. Then I wrote a title at the top of a fresh sheet. Plan. And underneath it, the list began. Call an attorney. Freeze the narrative. Protect accounts. Sell the apartment. Move quietly. Disappear digitally. Change my name. Never explain in a way that can be used against me. The list looked simple. It was. It was a heist blueprint for reclaiming a life that had been slowly stolen, while I stood in place pretending patience was love. By sunrise, I had my first appointment scheduled. Attorney Claire Ashford. Her office was downtown, tucked into a building that smelled like old paper, coffee, and serious decisions. She was recommended by a retired counselor from my church community who didn't ask questions before handing me a number. That alone felt like kindness. Claire was calm in the way I imagine surgeons are calm. She didn't waste words. She didn't perform sympathy. She listened like facts mattered more than drama. I told her everything. The 20 years, the gifts, the invitation, the stage, the number. Grant's quiet confidence when he said he knew my finances. Claire didn't flinch. When I finished, she folded her hands and said, "You're not overreacting." I didn't realize how badly I needed to hear that. "Here's the truth," she continued. "If they know your financial picture, they've either had access to information they shouldn't, or you've been more visible than you realized. Either way, we shut this down now." We spent 2 hours building a strategy that sounded almost boring in its precision. That was the point. Safety isn't cinematic. It's meticulous. She advised me to close my existing accounts and open new ones at institutions outside the networks my children might anticipate. She suggested I update beneficiaries, secure documents, and create a paper trail that reflected intent. "Think of it as reducing their surface area," she said. I nodded, because I was done being a surface they could land on. The next 72 hours became a controlled sprint. I moved through banks with a folder of identification and a face that didn't invite conversation. I signed forms with a steady hand. I transferred funds with the calm of a woman who finally understood that survival is not a moral failing. I wasn't hiding money from my children. I was protecting my life from people who had proven they saw me as a funding source. When Claire said we should consider selling my apartment quickly, I surprised myself by agreeing without hesitation. That apartment had held me together after Thomas died. It was where I learned how to be a widow without becoming a ghost. But I understood something now. Nostalgia is beautiful and dangerous. If I stayed rooted to the life they already knew, I was staying reachable. So I called a real estate agent and asked for a fast, clean sale. No open house circus, no gossip-friendly signage. Just efficiency. The market moved quickly. People like small apartments in safe buildings when interest rates and life both feel unstable. Within 2 weeks, I had an offer that was fair enough to accept. The day I signed the paperwork, I felt a strange hush settle in my chest. Not sadness. Relief. I was not abandoning my past. I was refusing to let it be used as an anchor. Then came the hardest task, and it had nothing to do with money. I went home and looked at the framed photos. The ones that had sat in my living room like stubborn witnesses. Sienna missing her teeth. Grant beside the snowman. Thomas in that brown coat. I had always dusted them gently, like the memories were fragile. When Claire mentioned that an identity shift would be cleaner if I reduced sentimental exposure, I knew what she meant. Photos make you traceable in ways that aren't only emotional. They also make you hesitate. And hesitation is a crack people like my children can pry open. So I bought boxes. On a Tuesday afternoon, I pulled each frame from the shelf. I wiped the glass once, a ridiculous act of respect. Then I wrapped them in packing paper. I told myself I was doing this to protect the future. But when I placed Sienna's childhood photo in the box, my hand paused. Because this was the version of her I had loved without conditions. This was the child who used to race me to the door after school. The memory stung in that quiet place where grief lives long after you've stopped calling it grief. I swallowed it down. Not because I was heartless. Because I was determined. I boxed Grant, photos next. I didn't linger. I couldn't afford to. By evening, the walls looked bare. Less like a home, more like a stage set after the actors have left. That emptiness was brutal. And liberating. The digital disappearance was even colder. I canceled my phone plan. I opened a new number under a different carrier. I deleted my social media accounts one by one, each click like sealing a door from the inside. People who haven't been hunted by guilt and entitlement underestimate how loud the internet can be. I wasn't going to leave my life scattered in searchable fragments. That night, my new phone buzzed. An unknown number. I answered anyway. Mom. Grant. His voice carried the same careful control he'd used at the party. I heard you left dramatically. I almost laughed. I had left calmly. But of course, calm refusal feels theatrical to people who expect submission. What do you want? I asked. Silence. Then a sigh like I was the difficult one. You're making this bigger than it needs to be, he said. We were trying to include you. By demanding $200,000 in front of strangers. It was a family investment. Family doesn't ambush. His tone sharpened. You're not young anymore. You should be thinking about what legacy means. There it was. The new angle. Fear dressed as advice. I felt something inside me firm into stone. My legacy is the life I can still live, I said, not the one you want to decorate. He went quiet for a beat. Then he tried the final thread. We can talk privately. We can make a plan that works for everyone. I understood what he meant. Give us access again. Give us a route back to your money. I exhaled slowly. No. One syllable. Clean. Permanent. He lowered his voice. Do you really want to end your life like this, alone? The cruelty wasn't even disguised now. I closed my eyes. Because there are sentences that become turning points if you let them. And that one was his last mistake. I am alone because you chose that for me, I said quietly. I'm staying alone because I'm choosing safety. His anger surfaced. You're being selfish. I almost admired the audacity. 2 decades of silence, and he still wanted to brand me as the villain for not funding his ocean view fantasy. This conversation is over, I said. He said my name like a warning. I ended the call. And as the line went dead, something else snapped with it. Not love. The illusion that they would ever treat me as a person first. The next morning, Claire filed the initial paperwork for my legal name change. She explained the timeline and the steps in a measured tone. No drama. No promises she couldn't keep. Just process. A week later, I stood in a courtroom that smelled like disinfectant and tired realism. The judge reviewed the documents with the bored neutrality of someone who had seen every variation of human reinvention. When my case was called, I rose. My hands were steady. My voice was steadier. I'm requesting a legal name change for personal safety and privacy, I said. That was the truth. Not the whole truth. But enough. The judge scanned my paperwork. Then nodded. Approved. effective upon completion of the statutory timeline. His gavel struck once. A small sound. A massive shift. I walked out of the courthouse into afternoon light that felt different on my skin. Not warmer. Cleaner. As if I had finally stepped out of a room where the air was slowly poisoning me. The rebirth wasn't here yet, but the door to it had been unlocked. And for the first time in 20 years, I wasn't waiting to be chosen. I was choosing myself. 3 months after the judge approved my name change timeline, the letter arrived that made it real. Not emotional real. Legal real. A crisp envelope confirming that Evelyn Hartwell was now a name I could leave behind like a coat that had grown too heavy to wear. I stood in my new condo, holding that paper with a steady hand and a strangely quiet heart. This place was smaller than the mansion I'd fled and brighter than the apartment I'd sold. It sat in a coastal town where the air smelled like salt and possibility. The building was modest but carefully maintained, the kind of place where people paid for peace, not status. My name on the mailbox read, Mari's Ellery. I touched the letters once like I was checking if the world would argue. It didn't. I had imagined reinvention would feel dramatic. Like a movie cut. A sharp before and after. Instead, it felt like breathing without permission for the first time in decades. I built my days carefully. Not because I was fragile. Because I was learning how to be free without waiting for chaos to interrupt it. At 5:30 every morning, I woke to the faintest light spilling into my bedroom. I made coffee in a clean, unchipped mug I'd bought specifically for this life. I drank it slowly while the ocean woke up in front of me. The sunrise became my private ritual. Pink bleeding into gold. The water shifting from ink to glass. Seagulls making noisy claims to the morning, as if they had personally arranged it. I started walking the boardwalk at 6. Same route. Same pace. I wasn't chasing fitness. I was chasing the version of myself that had been trapped behind a locked door for 20 years. The old city had always felt like jagged edges. This place was soft in the best way. Nobody here knew my history, which meant nobody expected me to perform forgiveness. Nobody looked at me like a mother who should have tried harder. I was simply a woman in her late 60s who liked early mornings and kept to herself until she didn't anymore. That shift happened because of June Whitmore. She lived 2 doors down, 72, quick-witted, and allergic to nonsense. The first time we met, I was struggling with a delivery box that was too heavy for one stubborn woman but too stubborn to admit defeat. June walked over, lifted one side like it weighed nothing, and said, "Either you're moving in or running away. Both deserve help." I laughed before I could stop myself. It surprised me. Laughter is easy when your life isn't guarded like a secret. We started with small talk in the hallway. Then coffee. Then a Tuesday habit of walking together in the mornings. She told me about her late husband and the years she spent learning to enjoy quiet instead of fearing it. I told her I was newly relocated and uninterested in the past. She accepted that with a nod that said she understood the difference between privacy and pain. During those first months, I had moments of shockingly ordinary happiness. I found a small bookstore with a reading corner near the windows. I found a bakery that made lemon scones that felt almost illegal in their softness. I learned the rhythm of local life. Farmers markets on Saturdays. Live music in the park twice a month. Neighbors who waved without interrogating your story. The ocean became a kind of therapy that didn't require appointments. I would stand at the waterline with my shoes in my hand, letting cold foam touch my ankles, and I'd think, this is what peace looks like when it's not bribed. I wasn't reckless with money. I had too much respect for the life I almost lost. But I was proud, quietly, stubbornly. I paid my bills on time, with no fear of anyone auditing my worth. I kept my accounts organized. I watched my savings stabilize. Independence at 69 isn't glamorous. It's sacred. And for 6 months, nothing from my old world reached me. No surprise calls. No guilt-laced messages. No indirect pressure creeping through mutual acquaintances. The silence was different now. It wasn't abandonment. It was distance I had chosen. Then, on a Tuesday morning, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail. But something in me has always wanted to be reasonable before being ruthless. Hello? Ms. Ellery. The voice was male, professional, slightly too smooth. This is Malcolm Reed. I'm an attorney calling regarding a matter involving an account connected to your late husband. The name Thomas Hartwell still had the power to tilt the room, even though I was prepared for it. Grief doesn't vanish. It just stops controlling the steering wheel. What kind of matter? We believe there may be a previously undisclosed account that was not addressed in the estate. A financial oversight, potentially. The phrasing was careful. Neutral, but not accidental. I stepped onto my balcony and watched the ocean like I needed something honest in my line of sight. How did you get this number? I represent an interested party, he said politely, dodging the question like a man trained in it. We're trying to resolve this efficiently. I'm not interested. A pause. Ms. Ellery, this could be significant. What amount? He hesitated, just a fraction too long. Approximately 200,000. I went still. 200,000. The exact number that had been demanded at the garden party, under the banner of legacy. Coincidence is a comforting word people use when they don't want to admit they're being targeted. I had stopped being comforted by convenient explanations. So let me understand, I said evenly. This account conveniently matches the amount my adult children tried to pressure me into giving them publicly. Another pause. He didn't answer. That was answer enough. I'm not discussing anything without my attorney, I said, and I'm not acknowledging the existence of something you can't prove. His tone shifted slightly. Refusing to cooperate could complicate this. I almost smiled. There it was. A gentle threat wrapped in legal courtesy. Goodbye, Mr. Reed. I ended the call. June found me later in the lobby, and I didn't tell her everything. Just enough to explain why my smile had sharpened into something more defensive. Old life trying to knock, she asked. Something like that. She nodded. Then keep your door locked. For 2 days, I convinced myself the call had been a probe. A test. A fishing line thrown into calm water. Then the certified summons arrived. The envelope was thick, official, the kind of paper that makes your stomach react before your mind catches up. Grant was suing. Not Sienna. Not Damien. Grant. My son, who had learned to say family when he meant funding. The claim was absurd on its face. That I had withheld marital assets. That a lost account existed. That I had a duty to resolve it for fairness. Fairness. A word that sounded almost comic when used by someone who had erased me for 2 decades. I sat at my dining table with the summons spread out in front of me. The ocean was visible from my window, calm and indifferent. The old version of me would have panicked. The mother voice would have whispered, maybe you should just settle. Maybe peace is worth paying for. But peace you buy from predators is not peace. It's a subscription. And they always raise the price. I called Claire Ashford immediately. Her voice was steady as ever. I expected this, she said after I summarized the documents. You did. Yes, when people fail publicly, they often pivot privately to legal intimidation. I exhaled slowly. So what now? Now we respond with facts, she said. They have no case unless they can prove that account exists and that you intentionally concealed it. The timing alone makes their motive obvious. I hate that they can still reach me. They're reaching for money, Claire corrected gently. Not you. That landed like a cold comfort. She asked me to forward every document. She instructed me not to speak to anyone connected to Grant or Sienna. No calls. No emails. No emotional statements that could be framed as instability. We're going to keep this clean, she said. We will build a timeline, pull records, and show the court exactly what this is. A retaliation attempt. I stared at the summons again. The paper looked like authority. But I had learned the difference between authority and truth. Do I need to come back to the city? I asked. Eventually, yes, she said. But not yet. For now, keep living your life. Let them be the ones who look frantic. I looked out at the ocean again. The sunrise tomorrow would still happen. The boardwalk would still be there. June would still knock on my door with her sharp humor and unspoken loyalty. Grant had thrown a legal stone into my calm water. But the calm was mine. And I was done letting my children rewrite me into the villain of their financial fantasies. When I hung up, I felt something settle into place. Not fear. Focus. They had mistaken my quiet life for weakness. They had mistaken my motherhood for access. Now they were going to meet the version of me that had already survived the worst part. The part where I believed silence was my fault. Claire was right. They had no case. And I had something better than revenge. I had receipts. A new name. And a life I was no longer willing to surrender for the comfort of people who only remembered I existed when they needed a check. The old city looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, emotionally. I hadn't been back since I left the mansion driveway with my dignity intact and my future threatened. Returning now felt like walking into a museum exhibit of a version of myself that had finally died. The courthouse was exactly what courthouses always are. Cold air, hard benches, fluorescent lighting that makes everyone look slightly guilty even when they are. I arrived early because calm is easier to maintain when you're not rushing. Claire Ashford met me in the hallway. She wore a dark suit and the expression of someone who doesn't need to raise her voice to end a lie. They'll try to make you the villain, she said softly. I know. They'll also try to make you emotional. I won't give them either. That earned a small nod of approval. We walked into the courtroom together. Judge Harold Winslow was already seated, scanning files with the neutral fatigue of a man who has watched too many people weaponize family as an excuse for greed. Grant was there with Rowan. Sienna was there with Damien. They sat in a neat line, polished and composed, as if they were attending a charity dinner rather than suing their mother under a fictional banner of fairness. I felt something strange. Not rage. Distance. The kind you feel when you finally stop seeing your children as my bobbies and start seeing them as adults who chose to become this. The case was called. Grant's attorney opened with confidence. He spoke about concerns regarding undisclosed marital assets. He painted a story where I was a financially savvy widow who had withheld information and blocked rightful clarity. Then he pivoted to emotion. He spoke about how my sudden disappearance had caused distress, how my name change had been alarming, how my silence forced them to seek legal pathways. The audacity was almost impressive. They were trying to transform my self-defense into an attack. Grant took the stand first. He looked at the judge with the practiced sincerity of someone who knows how to hold eye contact without revealing a conscience. My mother has always been private, he said, but we believe she may have access to an account tied to my late father that was never disclosed. He said it calmly, as if he weren't the same man who had announced my financial totals with quiet precision at a garden party. He leaned into the victim narrative next. We tried to handle this as family, he said, but she refused to communicate. I heard that sentence and understood why people love courtrooms. Because they give liars structure. Sienna followed. Her voice was softer, more emotional. She described her worry about my well-being, her confusion about my withdrawal, her desire to ensure the truth was honored. She even used the word legacy again. I almost smiled at the repetition. Same tactic. Different stage. Damien didn't testify long. He didn't have to. His role was to add polish to their storyline, to make the claim look like a dignified concern rather than a financial ambush gone wrong. Then Claire stood, and the temperature of the room changed. "Mr. Vale," she said to Grant, "you stated you tried to handle this as family." "Yes. Let's clarify what you mean by as family." She approached the bench and handed the judge a folder. Exhibit A is a timeline of contact attempts made by my client over the last 20 years. Then she turned to Grant. "Do you recognize these call logs?" His expression flickered. She projected them. Dates. Times. Voicemails left. Years of attempts that ended in silence. My stomach tightened anyway. Not from pain. From the strange shock of seeing my devotion converted into evidence. "Is it your testimony," Claire asked, "that your mother refused to communicate despite these records of consistent outreach?" Grant adjusted his posture. "She was persistent, but that doesn't mean." "It means she tried," Claire cut in smoothly, "for 2 decades. The judge made a note. Claire moved to texts and emails. Exhibit B messages sent on birthdays, holidays, and family milestones. The words were polite, warm, hopeful. Unanswered. Claire didn't linger on sentiment. She used it as scaffolding. To show pattern. "To your knowledge," she asked, "did your mother ever receive a written request from you regarding this alleged account before the garden party?" Grant hesitated. "The account came to our attention later." "Interesting," Claire said, voice calm as a scalpel. "Because Exhibit C shows a documented legal inquiry initiated by attorney Malcolm Reed that referenced an amount of approximately $200,000. She let the number exist in the air. Then she added the next blow. $200,000 is also the exact amount you and your sister attempted to pressure my client into signing over publicly at Ms. Vale's birthday gathering. Correct." Grant looked at the judge and tried for composure. "That was a separate matter." "A separate matter," Claire repeated, "with the same amount, the same urgency, and the same claimed moral framing." She paused. "Is coincidence your legal strategy today?" A quiet ripple moved through the room. Judge Winslow didn't smile, but his eyes sharpened. Claire turned to Sienna next. "Ms. Vale, you testified that you were worried about your mother's well-being." "Yes." "Did you attempt to visit her residence after your birthday event?" "No." "Did you call her to ask if she was safe?" "I didn't have the chance." "Did you respond to her last 20 years of messages before suddenly inviting her to a public event designed to announce a family legacy purchase?" Sienna's jaw tightened. "We wanted to reconnect." "With paperwork prepared?" Claire asked gently. "A signature table already set up?" The judge looked up fully now. Claire had him where facts always do. At the center of reality. Then came the moment I knew was inevitable. Claire faced the judge. "Your Honor, my client did not vanish impulsively. She proceeded through legal channels to protect herself. Her name change was approved according to statutory requirements." She turned toward me. "Ms. Ellery, would you please state your former legal name for the record?" My voice did not shake. "Evelyn Hartwell." Grant's face changed. Not shock. Calculation. As if he was measuring how this reveal might play on the legal ledger. Claire continued. "And your current legal name?" "Maurice Ellery." The courtroom seemed to inhale. The new identity was no longer rumor. It was law. Claire placed another document in front of the judge. Exhibit D, court-approved name change documentation. Then she delivered the simplest, most fatal truth. This woman did not change her name to deceive her children. She changed it to escape financial coercion. Judge Winslow read quietly. His silence was heavier than any speech. When it was my turn to testify, I stood with the calm of someone who had already made peace with being misunderstood by the only people who should have understood her. I didn't perform sorrow. I didn't beg for sympathy. I told the truth like a ledger. My husband, Thomas Hartwell, died 23 years ago. I watched Grant flinch slightly at the mention of his father's name. I attempted contact for approximately 20 years. I nodded toward the exhibits. The records show that. I was invited to my daughter's birthday after 2 decades of silence. At that party, I was asked to contribute $200,000 in public with prepared documents. I looked at the judge. I refused. Shortly after, I took legal steps to protect my finances, my privacy, and my mental peace. Then I said the line that had been building in me for 20 years. My adult children have no right to my money. The sentence landed clean. Not bitter. Not theatrical. Just true. Judge Winslow leaned back slightly. And when he finally spoke, his voice was quiet and absolute. I'm prepared to rule. Grant's attorney tried to interrupt with a last-minute framing. Judge Winslow raised a hand. No. A single word. The kind that ends games. This claim is speculative, strategically timed, and unsupported by evidence. He glanced at Grant and Sienna directly. The court is not a tool for retaliating against a parent who exercises financial autonomy. He paused, then delivered the sentence that felt like a gavel strike inside my chest. Adult children do not have a legal entitlement to a parent's assets simply because they desire them. He dismissed the case. Then he added what Claire had asked for. A protective order. Not dramatic language, not a courtroom speech for television. A practical, restraining-style boundary that limited contact and prohibited financial harassment through legal intimidation. And then the judge's tone changed. Not legally. Personally. This court also recognizes the moral ugliness of what occurred. He didn't say it with anger. He said it with disappointment, which somehow hurt them more. You invited your mother back into your lives when you believed she was financially useful. That is not reconciliation. That is exploitation. I felt my throat tighten. Not from sadness. From the rare shock of being publicly seen. He finished with finality. Case dismissed. When I stepped outside, the sunlight was bright enough to make me squint. The old city traffic hummed like nothing significant had just happened. But something significant had. I stood on the courthouse steps for a brief moment and let the air fill my lungs. Claire touched my elbow lightly. You're free. I nodded. Because the word meant more than legal victory. It meant the end of a long, humiliating chapter where motherhood had been used as a lever against me. I walked forward into the light. Not as Evie Hartwell, the woman who waited, but as Mari's Ellery, the woman who left and didn't come back empty-handed. I came back with my life. The ocean doesn't care about courtroom victories. It doesn't applaud. It doesn't ask for updates. It just keeps arriving on schedule, like a calm god with no interest in human drama. That was the first thing I noticed after the trial ended and the city finally released me back to my life. I returned to my coastal town with the kind of quiet exhaustion that comes after you've carried a truth for years and then set it down in public. The condo felt familiar again. June's knock on my door felt normal again. The sunrise returned like it was confirming I hadn't imagined my exit. For a while, I lived in that relief. Not giddy happiness. Not revenge. Just the gentle, ordinary safety of not being hunted. Then the letter arrived. It came on a Tuesday, months after the hearing, in an envelope that looked simpler than the ones that had once summoned me into a trap. No embossed flourish. No expensive paper trying to intimidate me into gratitude. Just my new name. Mari's Ellery. Handwritten. The handwriting was neat, careful. Sienna. I didn't open it right away. That might sound dramatic, but it was. It was practical. I've learned that some doors are easier to keep closed than to reopen and regret. I made coffee. I sat by the window. I watched the sky gather itself into morning. When I finally slid my finger under the flap, I was calm enough to be honest with what I felt. The letter was an apology. Not a performance one. Not a public-facing, reputation-polishing version of remorse. It was quiet, human, imperfect. She wrote about therapy, about the long, uncomfortable work of realizing you can be someone's child and still be capable of cruelty. About the shame of that birthday party, the legal escalation, the ways she had convinced herself that I was difficult so she wouldn't have to admit she was wrong. She didn't excuse Grant. She didn't blame Damien. She didn't ask me to absolve her. She said she was sorry. And for a moment, that was enough to make my chest ache in a soft, confusing way. Because there is a kind of grief that arrives even when you get the apology you deserved. Not because the apology is useless, but because it came too late to resuscitate the life that might have existed if love had been offered at the right time. At the bottom of the letter was a line that didn't try to pull me back into the family machine. I'm not asking you to come back. I'm only asking you to know I finally understand what we did to you. I read that sentence twice. Then I folded the letter and placed it beside my coffee mug. I didn't cry. Not because I was stone. Because I was tired of tears that served other people's relief more than my peace. The package that arrived 2 days later was smaller. A plain box. Inside was the childhood necklace. The one I remembered so clearly, it almost felt like a recurring dream. A small, delicate piece I had given Sienna when she was young, after a school recital where she had stumbled on stage and then laughed her way through the embarrassment. I'd clasped it around her neck that night and told her she was braver than she realized. I hadn't seen that necklace in decades. Holding it now was like holding a time capsule of innocence. A version of motherhood that was simple. A version of Sienna that wasn't armored by status, pride, and that polished social world that measures love by usefulness. I turned it over in my palm. The metal was cool. The memory was warmer than I expected. This was the moment where movies would give you the reconciliation scene. A phone call. A tearful reunion. A promise to do better. But real life doesn't owe anyone a cinematic ending. What I felt wasn't hatred. It was mourning. Not just for what had happened, but for what hadn't. For the birthdays that could have included laughter instead of silence. For the grandchildren I could have known without having to search them like clues on the internet. For the ordinary family dinners that never happened because my children had decided absence was easier than accountability. The necklace didn't undo any of that. It just confirmed that Sienna had finally looked backward and recognized the damage. That mattered, but it didn't change my direction. I didn't respond. I didn't return the letter with a carefully written statement of forgiveness. I didn't call to negotiate a new relationship built on fragile promises. I placed the necklace in a small wooden box I kept for the few items that still held meaning without power over me. Some memories deserve respect. They do not deserve control. A week later, June knocked on my door with a grin that usually meant harmless trouble. "Don't be busy," she said. "I'm kidnapping you for your birthday." I told her I couldn't be kidnapped in my own condo. She rolled her eyes and did it anyway. We went to a small restaurant overlooking the water. Nothing fancy. Just good food and the kind of sunlight that makes you forget the uglier corners of your history. She had somehow convinced the staff to bring a cake with a single, cheerful candle. When they set it down, I stared at the frosting longer than I should have. 70. It looked like a number that belonged to someone else. June leaned toward me. "You made it," she said simply. No speech. No pity. Just the truth. I blew out the candle and felt something in me loosen. This was what chosen family looked like. Not grand declarations, just presence, consistency, warmth with no price tag attached. Later, back at my condo, we ate leftover cake with coffee. She told me a ridiculous story about getting banned from a community book club for correcting too many people with too much joy. I laughed so hard I had to wipe my eyes. It hit me then, quietly. My life had not ended when my children left. It had just been delayed. When June finally went home, I sat alone with the ocean breathing beyond my windows. I thought about Sienna's letter, Grant's silence, Thomas's absence, and I let myself say the sentence that had been building into truth for years. I hadn't lost my children had lost me. The line didn't feel bitter. It felt accurate. There is power in numbing reality without asking it to comfort you. 2 years passed the way good healing often does. Almost invisibly. I built habits that were mine. Sunrise walks, Saturday markets, a small volunteer role at the local library, coffee with neighbors whose kindness wasn't conditional. By 72, the town recognized me, not as a scandal, not as a woman who ran away, just as Mari's, the early riser, the woman who always returned her books on time, the one who brought lemon cookies to community events and never asked for applause. I kept the letter. I kept the necklace. Not as openings. As proof that even late understanding is still understanding. But my peace was no longer negotiable. On some mornings, I still feel the soft ache of what could have been. That ache doesn't own me. It just visits. Then the ocean arrives again. The sky changes color. Life continues in the quiet. Miraculous way it always does when you stop begging for love from people who only remember you when they need something. This was never a redemption story. It was self-rescue. And I didn't need a perfect family ending to live a real, dignified life. I just needed the courage to choose one.